Hello, listener. This is The Way In, a podcast about finding our way through the often impenetrable worlds of psychotherapy, psychiatry, and psychoanalysis. I'm your host, Tyson Connor. I'm a psychoanalytic psychotherapist and clinical supervisor in Washington State. Each episode of this show, I talk with other mental health professionals about the work they do and topics they care about, using language that you don't need an advanced degree to understand. Come join us as we try to find the way in. And today, our guides on the show are Kevin and Katherine Klevjer. Kevin and Katherine co-own their private practice based in Seattle known as Encounter Psychotherapy. Both have Relational Psychodynamic Psychotherapy certifications from the Contemporary Psychodynamic Institute, with Katherine having completed the RPT Supervision and Consultation certification as well. Kevin also holds a Therapeutic Game Master certification from Geek Therapeutics. Hi.
Hi.
And you're married.
We are.
Yeah.
To each other, even.
Yes, that.
Thank you both for coming on the show.
Yeah,
welcome.
thanks for having us.
Thank you.
And today they will be our guides into the topic of RPT and therapeutic Dungeons and Dragons.
Chill.
So, hi, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
This is my first time interviewing more than one person, much less a couple. Much less a couple who I've been in a training program with for the past 2 years. So there's a lot of firsts for me right now.
And
Exciting.
probably your first time in a PVC pipe sound booth.
Yes, listener.
Got constructed.
Kevin built a PVC pipe sound booth unrelated to this podcast. When I was like, you want to talk about this D&D thing? He was like, sure, in a insulated sound booth. And I was like, okay. So if this is the most professional episode that I produce, thank Kevin.
And if not, we don't want to hear about it.
Very true. Very true. Great. So today we're talking about RPT and therapeutic D&D, and maybe more broadly, therapeutic tabletop RPGs.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So before we get into defining some of those acronyms, since on this show we kind of play around with the idea that all theory is autobiography, how did each of you, individually and together, come to these categories of RPT and integration with Dungeons and Dragons?
I'll let you start, Kev.
Okay. Well, I start with you in my story, my love. We were dating, and she got super into D&D, and then I think somehow I was more into hearing about her group, which doesn't speak to her level of interest in her group, just more that I have ADHD and a lot of passion. And I was stoked, like, what? This game sounds amazing. I thought it was demonic. Growing up in a religious home,
Gotcha.
That was my initial take on Dungeons and Dragons. Y'all, it's a hoax.
the demonicness of
Yes,
it.
yes.
The
D&D
satanic,
itself is awesome.
the satanic panic,
Right.
as they called it.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So if you're out there and you share any sort of faith that's a little nervous about something called Dungeons and Dragons that has magic in it, it's super cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, getting into her story, I was like, oh my God, I got to start. And then a year later, she had some friends, our friends Pete and Stephanie, who were starting a new group. And I was like, I got to get in. Let me in. And then became instantly obsessed. And it's one of my longer running ADHD passions, I'll say.
Great.
And after about a year with that group, I was like, I got to figure out how to be a dungeon master so I can leave, because I got to relieve Pete so he can take it easy.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm obsessed, so it fits. Then Katherine and I also both went to the Seattle school and had Roy Barsness as a professor, and were intrigued by his particular approach. That then he broke off and started the Contemporary Psychodynamic Institute, which started the Relational Psychodynamic Therapy certification program. That whilst dating and then marrying, we found ourselves both interested in, and Katherine was able to start it a couple years before me. and was singing its praises. And I was like, I freaking knew that was going to be awesome. So then financially, we hit a point where I could join.
I'm just such a good influence on you, is what you're saying.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And somewhere in there, Phil Dowd, another alum. I was seeing pop up in the Seattle School Alumni Facebook group that he was leading therapeutic D&D groups. And I was like, that sounds freaking awesome. I could do that. It's the pandemic and I'm stuck at home with nothing to do, so I might as well hyper-focus and figure out how to do this. And paid off. And so I got coffee with him, and then we paid him for like a 2-part session with him to like be players and experience it. It was super helpful. And then we decided to start a group. Partway into that, I found out that there's a group called Geek Therapeutics.
Yeah.
That's really awesome. And they had developed a therapeutic game master certification program that was brand new. So I was the 4th cohort ever. Don't mean to brag, maybe a little. And it was very, very cool, very helpful. And they hit on TTRPG, meaning tabletop role-playing games, like a breadth of them. So we had a weekly D&D sesh with someone, but then we were also playing a number of other ones, all of which had like slightly different rules and emphasis of experience. And it was very fun, but then there was also a deeper learning on the therapy end of things, and like just tons of great CEUs that I highly recommend.
Cool. So, Katherine, what about you? How did you end up here?
Well, so I got into D&D because I was working. I mean, I was interested in it for a little bit. I was working at a bar, and one of my friends and one of my coworkers wanted to start a group, and one of my coworkers was DMing. And so we worked through a campaign for about like a year or so. And that's what Kevin was referring to when I would come home and be like, this is what we did today. It was so fun. And so that was my introduction, and it was a lot of fun. And so when I found out that my friend Stephanie and her husband they were playing games on their own, and that they were starting another campaign, and we were welcome to join, I was like, yes, let's do it. Also because every D&D group is different. And my first D&D group was very serious. And this D&D group, the people we currently play with, are so silly. And I love both sides of it for different reasons. But it's a fun way to explore different kinds of play.
Yeah.
I think that's part of what I'm drawn to. And then RPT itself, oh man, I mean, I'll try to make this short, but I went to University of Florida in undergrad, very behavioral, was into behavior analysis. I was super into it. I was working at a lab there, very much the opposite of what I'm doing now.
Right.
But I think I liked the black and whiteness of it, finding answers and things like that.
Yeah.
But I realized that wasn't totally what I wanted to do. Fast forward, I'm graduating undergrad. I was in a really bad car accident. All of my dreams felt like they were impossible now. And then I found out about the Seattle School of Theology and Psychology and was sort of inspired for the first time. And so even though it was drastically different from what I had been planning and what I thought I wanted, it ended up being what I needed and got more into psychodynamic therapy there. And me and Roy had some ups and downs in school, but then in my final year in internship, he was my case conference leader, and working with him in that setting was really fascinating, and I loved the way he was thinking about cases. And so fast forward some more, I was in community mental health, burning out very quickly. And then I found out about RPT that was starting. And so I don't mean to brag, but I was in the first cohort.
Oh,
yeah. And just absolutely fell in love, was enlivened in the work in a way that I hadn't been since I graduated.
Yeah.
So, I've stuck with it and did the 2 years of the regular program, and then took a year off to have a baby. And then came back for third year and learned how to do consults and supervision. And now I'm still a part of my consult group. We still meet because it's that awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, both of you. Listener, I'm going to real quick do like a special vocabulary.
Oh, yeah. I'm so sorry.
No, this is part of my job. Is that I get to think about the listener. First of all, about RPT. Listener, we will have an episode where I interview Roy Barsness about his like theory and approach. That will happen probably next season because I didn't have the balls to ask him this season.
Oh, he would totally do it.
I know. That's partially why I didn't ask yet.
Not emotionally prepared.
So that's thing one. Thing two, we won't be going as in-depth in some of the concepts of RPT in this episode. But a lot of that, the vibe of it, you will have picked up already on this show. But for some D&D terminology, Dungeons & Dragons is the most common tabletop role-playing game. Tabletop role-playing games are these games that are played often with pen and paper, sometimes with miniatures and maps, not always, sometimes just in one's imagination. The way that I was describing it when I was first trying to convince my parents it wasn't demonic was it's just making like playing pretend, but with math. So instead of saying like, pew, pew, I shoot you, and then the other person saying, nuh-uh, you missed, you say, pew, pew, I shoot you, and then you roll a dice, and the dice says, nuh-uh, you missed. Most of the time.
Yes.
At least in my
Especially
case.
when you're a barbarian, you're supposed to be hitting.
Oh,
when you
no.
do.
Yeah.
Those
Barbara.
early levels are brutal, though.
Barbara, why?
Oh, poor Barbara.
That's for the listener, you see. That's Barbara, the librarian.
Barbarian.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yep.
So Dungeons & Dragons is the most popular tabletop RPG around. It's sort of very classic high fantasy, Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones, very like elves and dwarves and hobbits and dragons, as is in the name. There are many other tabletop RPGs, but a lot of the language and a lot of what's out there is set or heavily influenced or a take on Dungeons & Dragons. When Kevin says he wanted to be a game master or a dungeon master, that's the person who runs the game. Because when you're playing one of these games, in most of them, there's so many with so many different forms, but in most of them, the players are all creating a character that they are playing through. Not unlike playing a video game where there's an avatar of you in the world, but just with different systems to play with, different kinds of flexibility. But unlike a video game where there's a whole program making the rest of the world, for tabletop role-playing games, oftentimes it is a person who plays all the other characters, the rest of the world, who adjudicates outcomes, who makes rulings on the rules, because in tabletop role-playing games, since so much of it is imagination, the rules, although written in a way that can seem quite concrete, you come up with weird situations where someone needs to tell you, yes, that works, or no, that doesn't. And that's another part of the role of the Dungeon Master. So there you go. That's the context.
Well said.
Thank you.
And a campaign is when you play with mostly the same group of people over multiple different sessions to tell one long extended story.
Yes.
So when you hear us say campaign, think like full series of television is maybe a great example. When you hear us say session, think an episode of television. A session is like just sitting down playing for a number of hours that can range in length depending on how old people are and whether or not the group has children.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Katherine,
my first group, 8 hours.
Yeah.
Oh, God, yeah.
Current
College.
group with a 1-year-old and a 2-year-old ends up hopefully being 2 hours.
Yeah. Yeah.
with maybe some constipation potty training thrown in there.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
That'll happen.
It do be spicy as an adult.
So let's get into it. Like, how does therapeutic D&D work? Like, here's D&D. It's this game. How do you make it therapeutic?
I'm so glad you asked. And again, thanks for having me. I actually wanted to start with a couple of quotes from Stuart Brown, who wrote, "Play, how it shapes the brain, opens the imagination, and invigorates the soul." Awesome, awesome book. Highly recommend. So let's go with this one. Also, I do so many weird voices, which I did before I played D&D, and it's just leveled up since. So Stuart Brown, he says, I don't think it is too much to say that play can save your life. It has certainly salvaged mine. Life without play is a grinding, mechanical existence organized around doing the things necessary for survival. Play is the stick that stirs the drink. It is the basis of all art, games, books, sports, movies, fashion, fun, and wonder. In short, the basis of what we think of as civilization. Play is the vital essence of life. It is what makes life lively, which I love. Bonus quote, since you asked.
I did.
Stepping out of normal routine, finding novelty, being open to serendipity, enjoying the unexpected, embracing a little risk, and finding pleasure in the heightened vividness of life. These are all the qualities of a state of play. So this is hugely the aim of Therapeutic D&D. It is getting, in our case, we just do 18-year-old plus groups, but amazing vessel for therapeutic care for all ages. And actually, there's a lot of great groups out there for teens. I just can only pick one, and I like using the F word, so I only have so much time. But
as someone who works with teens, that's not really a barrier.
well, yeah,
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
yeah, that's
But,
true.
yeah, I get what you're
You know what
saying.
I'm saying?
Yep.
So, in an attempt to summarize quickly, I had to write this elevator pitch as part of my Geek Therapeutics Therapeutic Gaming Master course. So let's see how it sounds as I reread it after it's been a while.
Great.
And our group is called Encounter D&D. It's a play on both our name, Encounter Psychotherapy, and you have many encounters within D&D where it's a fighting encounter or maybe a social encounter, etc., where the group has to face a problem. And man, there's so many layers to it. There's also the encounter of the players encountering each other and the DM, of course. Encounter D&D utilizes the natural elements of playing Dungeons and Dragons as a tool or theater in which to enact mental and emotional growth. In playing with the guidance of a therapeutic facilitator, this is not how I talk in elevators, by the way.
Oh, okay, good. Good. I'd be hitting that next floor button.
Yeah, I gotta go. In playing with the guidance of a therapeutic facilitator, players are encouraged to engage in problem solving, perspective taking, developing empathy, social skills as they interact with the group, and there is also established a culture of feedback. There's reflection time at the beginning and end of session for facilitators and players to discuss what it was like for their character to experience different things, how it was for the players themselves to experience different things, what impacts each player had on each other in the game and in real life, etc. Additionally, research comes back again and again to show us that play itself is crucial for the development of intelligence, imagination, problem-solving skills, and flexibility over rigidity. All in all, it's a wonderful way for people to get lost in play and simultaneously get stretched therapeutically towards growth.
That's a good elevator pitch.
Yeah.
Oh, thanks. I hope you were going to the 9th floor.
I know. I was going to say, yeah, I hope it's a long elevator ride.
Just a slow old one.
It fits on one, screen's length of my iPhone, so it's not too long.
To be fair, I haven't heard people talk to one another in an elevator who didn't know one another in my life.
That's true.
I get excited, so forgive me if I'm speaking often. Don't forgive me. I'm informing you that this is how I like to be.
Great.
And now the other part of my ADHD is showing up. But don't edit this. This is important. People need to know sometimes we pause.
Happens in game too.
What were you just saying?
Talking in elevators.
Yeah.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. So I've been working on voices. My latest character is a frog humanoid named Danny Moonbeam, a.k.a. Dano. And I really have not traditionally been great in an Aussie accent. And so I was like, I want to learn it because that's a fun thing to just hyper-focus on and try to learn.
Yeah.
Righto. I'd like to apologize to our Aussie listeners, but
I'll forward the emails.
Of just phrasing that I find enjoyable for greeting. How you going?
That's good.
I chose to create Dano as a whimsical character. He's a frog raised by fairies in the Feywild, which is a mystical, some dark elements, but very playful, weird, silly elements as well. And myself had just been in a little more stressful time, wanted to get in touch with whimsical, playful Kevin and outgoing, which used to be more of my just kind of go-to self-state, and I felt like it's fizzled a little. So I've literally started saying, how you going? to everyone in the elevator when I ride it the last 2 weeks. And it's been really enlivening. And I've had a lot of lovely mini encounters with people.
Have you given them your
Nope.
elevator? Okay. But that is lovely.
Yeah.
Listener, talk to people in elevators.
Why not? You can say, how you going?
Yeah. So for a regular game of D&D, usually, including the Dungeon Master, you have anywhere between, well, theoretically, minimum of 2, but usually it's closer to minimum 4, maximum 8, 9. Once you get that big, it gets a little hard to wrangle. So how many players do you have for each of your games?
Our first group had 2. The last one had 3 or 4. So it was 2 additional. So we were both there as well. So there were 4 of us. And then the last one were 4 or 5?
3 players and me.
Okay. Yeah.
So, a unique thing we did with the first time, it was all online. And you'll notice in my elevator pitch, I wasn't saying therapist or client or patient.
Yeah.
Because I wanted to be able to form this to be what I wanted it to be. And I didn't want to have to fit it within the constraints of insurance.
Right.
And reporting it all perfectly for insurance. And also insurance pays shit.
Yes, it does.
In general, and then especially for group therapy, which I won't go into because it'll take too long. And so we were both falling in love with this idea. So I was like, okay, maybe I'll be DM and therapeutic hat. And you be player and wear a therapeutic hat. And help direct where my mind might get distracted, because she's good at that.
I try.
Yeah, it ended up going really well. So it was started abruptly and we shorter advertising. And so we actually had one client that was local and then one client that was somewhere in California. And that's another thing that was really great about not being a therapy group is we could open it up to anyone.
You didn't need to worry about practicing across state lines.
Yeah.
Which, listener, that's another thing that we could have a whole episode about. Is
Oh,
that
yeah.
complexity.
So second group, I wanted to do in person. And Katherine was no longer available at the time that made sense for me to do it.
Right.
So then it was me and then 3 players.
Gotcha. In a regular D&D game, usually people show up, there's snacks, there's some socializing, you play the game for a certain amount of time, and then when you hit your exit time, people stop, socialize for a little bit more, go home. It sounds like you have some structural changes to how you run it that emphasize certain parts of the game.
Yes, with room for flexibility. There's some reflection before and after. If there is something really intense happening, we'll keep the game going a little bit longer. And so there might be a little less time for reflection that time, but then you'll get back to it at the beginning of the next session. Or if there is something that really needs to be processed, maybe you stop a little bit early and do that. So there is room for flexibility, but having that structure is really helpful.
Something I recommend everyone do in life is take an improv class. Very, very awesome. Again, emphasis on play. Lovely. So fun. Puts you into is it your right brain that's more artsy?
I don't know.
I think.
I don't know.
I've been told by people who care more about neuroscience than feelings that right and left brain hemisphere thing is made up, but I need to look into it more.
Yeah.
Well, what one of the improv guys said was it gets you in your right brain and out of your left brain, if I remember right. And it's what comes to you in the moment with a prompt. Where does it take you? How do you feel it emotionally? So fun.
Free associative.
Yes, exactly. And so also, because we do this, I was able to use a business expense, you see.
Great.
To take this class, which I highly recommend all therapists do. And anyone else with a business, because it's helpful for anything.
Goldfish breeding.
I need improv for where to throw the fish food. Golly.
Yeah, well, there it is.
And so, yeah, people come in. I ask folks, if you're up for it, if you feel like you financially can pull it off, there's also some social skills part to it. So it's polite and good etiquette to bring food, especially, I was like, don't bring any on my behalf because you're paying me.
Right.
But yeah, if someone's DMing, which requires a lot of prep time typically, it's polite to bring food and snacks to say thank you, essentially. Whether you're directly saying, I am giving you food in exchange for D&D. Maybe don't say that. That's kind of weird. But yeah, people pull in. We have snacks. Once everyone arrives, a little bit of banter. I usually would ask the opening question. I say, you can say as much or as little to this as you want without revealing too much of your kind of personal life. Again, a difference with this being therapeutic D&D versus a therapy group. On a scale of 1 to 10, how are you, with 10 being amazing? And you can also just say the number, or you can just say pass. Every time someone at least says a number. And I've had someone say 3, and I don't want to talk about it. All right, I'm glad you're here. Or like, usually I give a number and say a lot more, if you can believe it. And then I would have us segue into, I'd say, hey, everybody stand up. We're going to do just a couple of very easy improv games, which is, you're wondering when this is going to come back. It came back. Even something like, I would clap and point towards you and say a word, and then you would clap and point towards someone else and say a different word that's just free associating.
Right.
So if I'm like pickle, you would say what?
Hamburger.
And I'd say taco.
Meat.
Salsa.
Tomato.
Carrot.
Potato. Yeah, you see, and because it did, we all got stuck on Mexican food, which
I said carrot.
Good. Yeah.
Oh shit, you're right. But I guess there's Mexi fries too with potatoes. But anywho, I could have said Voltron.
Right. Yes.
It's just whatever poops out of your brain.
Right.
It loosens everyone up. It gets them into the, work was shit today, but I'm about to play now.
Right.
That's the goal of that. I get a lot of eye rolls as people stand up for this. And then okay,
I love a good eye roll.
Yeah.
So honest.
Yeah.
Then say we're in the thick of it. It's like our 3rd week. I'll say, is there anything from last week that has hung with you guys that you want to just name, or that you're reflecting on, or that has stuck with you in some extra meaningful way?
From the game.
From previous session.
Gotcha.
And someone might instantly have something to bring, or if no one says anything, I'll have some ideas in mind of, hey, what was it like for you when, I'm going to make something up, you tried to seduce the dragon with your, level 20 charisma and you rolled a nat 1 and the dragon was like, nah, dog, and stomped you. And your character died. What was that like for you? Was it just playful and silly, or like, did you have emotion about it?
Yeah.
Which no one's going to have level 20 charisma in my games because they're usually level 1 through 5. But
Sure.
Or it could be anything that's happened in the room amongst players / DM. If I caught, or it was very obvious, multiple people caught something that left the room a little uncomfortable, usually I'll try to catch it at the end of that session, and then we might reflect on it again at the beginning of the next session. I'm thinking of one time in particular where I was kind of at the center of it, and I was a little too embarrassed to like go straight there. And then next session, I was like, hey, so remember when this happened? How was that for you guys? Because I definitely felt embarrassed, and I noticed I kind of avoided it. And I'm guessing you guys probably noticed that. Did you guys notice that? Yep. Okay, what was that like for you? And here's a little bit where my mind was. And so that's where I kind of try to splice together like play therapy, and then Irvin Yalom wrote Group Psychotherapy, highly recommend. Some more of his version of like here and now focused therapy groups, but as a therapeutic gaming experience, not therapy group. Insurance companies that are listening.
And a Yalom group is often referred to as a process group.
Right.
So it's very much about the like what is happening between the people.
Yes. Which innately has relational psychodynamic vibes.
Right, right. So listener, within the analytic tradition, there's this concept of the frame, right? The frame is sort of like the boundaries. The frame is like if you've ever seen a therapist, or if you have a sense that like your therapist isn't supposed to ask you to babysit their kid, right? That is a element of the frame. The frame says, this is what this relationship is, this is what we do here, and this is how we get things done. So what I'm hearing is that your therapeutic frame with your groups, first of all, with like telling people about the bringing food thing, the social skills part of it, it's an intentional acculturation. You're saying there's a subculture around RPGs, and I'm going to teach you the rules of that subculture, which isn't just so that someone knows that subculture, but it's also so that they learn how you pick up social rules.
Yes.
Right? You have a specific culture that you're bringing them into. And the other thing I'm hearing that sounds really interesting is that like you are not inviting absolute free association. You are not inviting people to show up and be like, my cat died, and when my cat died, that made me think about. You are saying our workspace here is the game. And that's what we're going to use.
The game and the here and now of interactions.
Right.
IRL, in real life, as they say.
Which isn't to say that if someone's cat died, that would like impact how they showed up in session. But it sounds like the framework that you have, in the same way that most frames are flexible, sounds like the frame that you're working with is like, this is our stuff. We've got this thing we're working on, and we've got one another in the room. And that's where we're focusing our energies. And so you start out with a little bit of loosening up, a little bit of checking in and reflecting on the last time, and then you play the game, and then there's this like feedback portion.
Yes.
How's that go?
Well, first, can I say something a little bit about the play?
Yeah.
Something that I also love about it is that it brings us back to the child inside of us. So when children go through something, they work through it, they process it through play.
Yes.
And I don't think that just goes away when we grow up. I think we still can use play in a variety of ways to process the things that we experience. So yeah, your cat died and that's horrible and you have feelings about that. Let's use the game to work through those feelings. And then, so the difference between kids and adults is we are going to reflect on that, and we're going to think more like in our like high brain thoughts.
Right.
You know how those work. The short, that one. I struggle with that one. And we're going to use that before and after, but the meat is processing through play.
This is making me think about I'm having self-realization live on the show, listener. I was working within this particular company that I had a lot of emotionally invested in, and I suddenly had a realization that like, oh, shit's falling apart here, and I need to leave, and this sucks because I care about these people, and the people in leadership I think are well-intentioned and are good people, but I think that they're making terrible mistakes that I don't want to stick around for. And in my process of working through my feelings about that, I wrote a one-shot for a completely different system.
Nice.
Roll for Shoes is what I used. That was about a bunch of people waking up in a spaceship where something had gone wrong.
Wow.
And I just had my players solve it. And as you were talking about like the way that children use play to process through stuff that happens, and I flashed back to that, I was like, okay, yeah, I buy in.
I kind of sort of just did that.
I definitely did that. Wow. So Ben, Allison, thank you for being my therapeutic agents. Those were my players in that game.
Nice.
One more thing about the structure as well is kids also need some structure to feel safe enough to play.
Right.
And so that's also where the therapeutic frame comes in therapy, but also in D&D, and the therapeutic D&D is we keep to this structure so that everybody feels safe enough to then be spontaneous.
Right. There's
Yes.
there's the idea that if you take a bunch of kids and you drop them off in the middle of a field where there's a tree and you have an adult by the tree and you're like, go play.
Mm-hmm.
Then they all stay very close to the tree.
Mm-hmm.
But if you stop in the middle of the field and you say, just over that hill, there's a chain link fence. Just don't go outside of that. Then they'll use the whole space
Exactly.
and inevitably climb a little bit beyond the fence.
Yep.
That was me.
Because testing boundaries is part of being human,
Yes.
Mhm.
right? But it's the structure, even the structure that we rebel against, that helps us explore, discover.
Mm-hmm.
Bonus Stuart Brown quote
Oh.
that segues well with what Katherine was just saying about play and processing. Very short. He just says, "The truth is that play seems to be one of the most advanced methods nature has invented to allow a complex brain to create itself."
Damn.
I know. And
That's
if you
real
think
good.
about, we both have toddlers right now, or
Mhm.
just the amount of play you
Yeah.
see in kids that just continues and continues. And like looking in the animal kingdom,
Mhm.
especially amongst mammals and primates, of course, the amount of play there is even with adults. And there's
Right.
still, I think of like Simba and Mufasa, and Simba like, "Dad, wake up." And then you're like, but then like romping around they start doing in the grass, and like all the playfulness, like polar bears, even though the moms are friggin' huge, they're
Right.
like, they could easily just swat one away in seconds. They're
Yeah.
like able to carefully, again, like frame protection boundaries, play in a way that doesn't lead to harm,
Right.
and that expands their little ones' minds.
So perhaps this will segue into the section about feedback. There's this idea that, like, if you ever get a kitten, if you want that kitten to grow into a cat that does not scratch when it's trying to play with people, it's important to play with the kitten. And when it scratches you with its little tiny claws, you're supposed to pull back and make a little eep noise. You're supposed to go like, you're supposed to yip,
Oh.
right? Same with puppies too. You need to yip.
Mhm.
The yip of, ouch, don't do that. That hurt. I didn't like that. Is important for small mammals to learn how to play without hurting.
Exactly.
In other words, without feedback, our play could be destructive.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes, absolutely.
There's I don't know who made it, paradigm, 4 quadrants. I'm just slipping into a different character, apparently. Ivan, and you see, what we have here is a quadrant 1. This is in the context of, like, in therapy, what's present, or what's present in any human's
Sure.
kind of experience. So there's what I know and what others know about me is what's conscious. So I know that I have blue eyes and 5'7" and a quarter, which maybe you don't know the exact number, but you would be able to look at me like, oh, he's a handsome, short little fella.
That is how I have you on my phone, actually.
Yeah, I figured. It's also my handle, etc. You get it. And then quadrant 2 is what I know about myself, but others don't know about me. So that'd be secrets.
Or just what's private.
Yeah, private. Yeah, yes.
Doesn't have to be like a dark secret.
Sure.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, private's a better word. And then,
Well, it could be both, right? Like
Yeah.
that's, and I think that that's actually, not to dwell too much on it, but I think that like the distinction between privacy and secrecy is super important, especially
fair.
in a context like this, right? Because like in any kind of therapeutic experience, secrets coming out is almost a universal theme. And especially within the framework that you guys have established for your games, there is so much room for privacy.
Oh,
Yes.
yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So
largely encouraged.
Yeah, nobody's forced into anything. And that's
Right.
that's made very clear as well, as like if you have any non-negotiables, like this is not something that you want to have in your gaming, whether it's something sexual or certain words or spiders, like it can literally be anything.
Right.
They can tell us that and tell us in private, so like other people might not know about it. I think you give them a sheet, right?
Yeah, I found a really good resource. You can just Google consent in gaming.
Yeah.
And there's a free like Google form you can duplicate and then put my encounter psychotherapy on it.
Right, yeah.
Send it out to, and I edited a couple of things so that you have a clear, like, and it's green light, yellow light, red light. I'm okay with a little bit of romance, but if we're talking sexual, fade to black.
Right.
Yeah.
So we can get it as nuanced as that.
Yeah.
Or like, I'm okay with us fighting giant spiders, but please don't describe how they're crawling towards us or you know, or just like I don't want them in there at all.
Yeah, or something that's specific to someone's trauma. Like, I was in a really bad car accident. Please don't put a really bad carriage accident where someone dies in this, you know, because this is therapeutic, but it's not therapy. So you can process some of your experiences and feelings in the game, but we're not here to necessarily work through your acute trauma. That's not what this is.
Yeah. This is really interesting. Listener, I don't know where this episode's going to get released in my release order, but it's one of the later ones I'm recording. And kind of the third one that I've done that's kind of like expanding the realm of psychotherapy, like sort of off the couch ideas. I did an episode on MDMA assisted treatment, an episode on this like sort of psychoanalytic equine therapy, and now this one on tabletop RPGs. And in all three of them, consent as a category has been huge. And that is really interesting to me. I don't know where to go with that because we talk about consent in the world of therapy, often the limits of consent, because at the start of a therapeutic relationship, neither party really knows where it's going to go. But maybe it has something to do with the fact that it is such a different frame. And I know consent is a big deal in tabletop role-playing like spaces, because when you're with a bunch of people making up a story together, anything you can imagine theoretically can be in the game, even very distressing and disturbing things. So you need to make sure everyone's all on the same page. But especially in a therapeutic context, like you were saying, Katherine, like it's not therapy. You're not trying to disrupt people at a level that they're not signing up to be disrupted.
Yeah.
I don't know. That was just a long free association. Don't know what to make of it.
And thank you for the segue back to my quadrants.
Yes. I'm sorry, Kev.
Sorry. That was really fun.
Quadrant 1, what's known to you and you know about yourself. Quadrant 2, privacy, we'll call it. What you know about yourself, but what you know, but others don't. Third quadrant, what others know about me, but I am not privy to, is blind spots.
Okay, yeah.
And then what I don't know about myself and others don't know about myself is the unconscious.
Gotcha.
And therapy hits on all of it.
Yeah.
And therapeutic gaming can hit on all of it. But the reason I brought it up was the context of social skills and feedback. And so here, blind spots, where it's just one of the most beautiful things about any therapeutic group where you're getting feedback is there's mixed feelings about this phrase, but like there's non-judgment because it's a culture already stated at the beginning that we're going to give each other feedback. And so being able to say, I've noticed your character has been really quiet, week 1, week 2, and you've been really friendly before and after game time, but you do feel distant. And I find myself really longing for more of you in real life and in the game. And I'm curious to know if you're aware of that and if you intended to make a quieter character or what's going on for you. And like for a new player and maybe someone new to a therapy-ish group, it's that just straight up off the bat, that could be really intimidating. And it probably was even 2 weeks in, 3 weeks in, but normalizing like, okay, now how was that I just asked such a pointed question? How are you hanging with that? And just normalizing, we're going to switch to observer camera and reflect and be curious often. And it strengthened that muscle as well so that we're not all getting lost in our insecurities and disappearing.
And that brings up the whole topic on character creation and using your character in the play and like working through stuff. People can choose all sorts of things to do in RPGs. That's what's so great. And you can make somebody who's exactly like you. You can make somebody who seemingly is not like you at all. But I feel like there's always something of you in every character that you make. And it's every new character in every new campaign, you're given an opportunity to explore a new part of yourself or something that you want to try. Like we told you about Barbara.
Yep, poor Barbara.
So Barbara was my owlin, an owl, humanoid owl, owlin, librarian, barbarian. And with her, I was able to explore my rage in a safe place.
Right.
And that was really good for me. But also in that, I was able to accept more of myself. So like my anger can be destructive and I need to be careful with it, but also I can use it to help the ones I love or to like
more fully express yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. It gives the player an opportunity to explore themselves in a safe way.
Yeah.
And it can be very surprising. This is where we get into that quadrant of things that are unconscious, so that you don't see and nobody else sees. You discover parts of yourself in the way that you play the game. And it's so exciting. And that can also, lead back to, I know before we went on this tangent, you were asking about the reflection questions.
Yeah.
And so that's, how we get back there.
Bless you.
Is at the end, that's a time to say like, oh yeah, I was really surprised by this, or this is something that I want to be able to do in real life, or this is something that I would never do in real life, but it was really fun to explore that.
Yeah. So it sounds like the reflection and feedback bits are both to reflect on yourself and also to provide feedback to others in the group.
And to the DM sometimes.
And,
Because it's like everybody's a participant.
Right. Yeah, the DM is not a, like in, what is it, Mazes and Monsters, that like TV movie where Tom Hanks played the guy who went crazy because D&D drove him crazy.
Oh my God, that's amazing.
I know, I haven't seen it, but
Neither
I know
have I,
of
but
it.
I have to.
Maybe you told me about it.
I
outrageous.
genuinely would not recommend watching it, but I would recommend watching a bunch of YouTube videos where other people have watched it.
Yes.
And then,
That's mostly how I've consumed it.
Fantastic.
But in that, and in a lot of the like early satanic panic like terror around D&D, the idea was that the dungeon master was this all-powerful god replacing person. But it sounds like, as is often true in games, and what you're explicitly doing and how you're setting up this therapeutic encounter is that the DM is a co-participant.
Yes.
There's no one who is over and above the process. They're all in it.
And that is what also is very much in line with relational psychodynamic therapy, is the therapist and the client are seen as co-participants. It's not just this expert who has all the answers and this client who is just lost and broken. We're two individuals meeting one another. And yes, the content is going to be primarily about the client, but it's also about the experience that the two people have together and what comes up in the room. And so that's what we're also trying to create with Therapeutic D&D, where the DM is involved, they're participating, they get the feedback too, because they're very much in the space and in the room and in the dynamic.
Right.
And so if we're not paying attention to one person, you're missing a big chunk of the dynamic.
Right. Right. I'm thinking about how a lot of the contexts within which I've heard D&D utilized therapeutically were all pretty behavioral, actually. It was like teaching people social skills, and then when you use those social skills in the game, then you get inspiration or something like that.
Okay.
It all felt very sort of like
mechanical, behavioral reward.
Right. Yes. And like as a teaching tool and as like a fun way to learn about stuff, which like absolutely has its place.
Right.
Hey, but it sounds like some of the stuff we're talking about now, the like co-participation of the game master, the feedback, this sort of use of reflection to explore what might be unconsciously playing out in the session. This all feels very, very psychoanalytic. I had a question in there, but it became a statement.
Thanks, man.
Well, you answered it for us. Thanks.
Did you create this together, or are you working off of a template? Like, how did you come to this structure and format and approach?
Well, I mean, we met with Phil Dowd, as Kevin said earlier. And so,
Heroically Gaming, I think, is his.
Yeah. Awesome.
Great.
So, I mean, when we were starting, we participated in those 2 little games with him. And so we did base it off of those experiences. But
Sure.
we've sort of tweaked it in terms of like, how we're starting and maybe the reflection questions that we're asking, especially as we've gone through more of the RPT program. The way we approach, I imagine at this point, I don't remember a whole lot, it was years ago, but I imagine we're approaching it differently than we did at the very beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I gave everyone, the 2 players from our first group.
Everyone, both of them.
Yes. A feedback form, because again, rolling with the culture of feedback.
Right.
And deeply appreciate it, especially I got feedback from both of us. One offered some frank stuff that was really helpful. Like initially it was a 2-hour session and it just felt a little crammed. And I realized I might technically then be sort of losing money by making it 2.5 hours, but I'm making it a richer experience by making it 2 and a half. So I changed it to 2.5 for the second group. And also, like, I wanted there to be 4 player characters. And since we only had 3, I decided to create a 4th character and try to play him while also playing all the other characters. And I made him kind of OP. That's right. Overpowered for the listener.
Thank you.
And
which is kind of a trope in the culture of D&D, right?
Yeah.
The DMPC, which stands for Dungeon Master's Player Character, which is kind of a trope in the culture of like, we've hit on a couple tropes in the culture that I want to call out.
Yep.
Sorry to sidetrack.
Please.
We will come back.
No, go for
but
it.
The first is this idea that like most people, the first time they make a D&D character, make something that's in some way or other like working through their shit.
Yeah,
absolutely.
They don't know it, but they are.
Exactly.
Or their like ideal self.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. It's deeply revelatory. So much so that it's oftentimes a joke, right? Like first time Dungeons and Dragons player who's working through their trauma, right? That's like a thing.
Yes.
If you are listening to this and are familiar with some of the popular like D&D live play type stuff in Fantasy High of Dimension 20 on Dropout, right? The character of Kristen Appleby's, that is Allie Beardsley's first player character.
Absolutely.
And oh my God, are they working through their religious trauma?
Bless them.
And it's just a wonderful journey that she goes on.
Too good.
But it's standard D&D stuff. The other trope is that the DMPC, that a dungeon master will create a player character that gets put into a game, and oftentimes as a way to have like the avatar of God present. Like the joke is the DMPC is like becomes the main character in the fantasy story that is the game, and is often overpowered.
Totally happening with Gleer.
In
the second season of Fantasy High, we're in the middle of it.
No spoilers.
Oh boy. I didn't watch the second season, so it was
it's phenomenal.
We're into it.
There's a lot of Gleer. It's fantastic.
I do like Kalir. Yogurt.
He's a depressed stepdad, everyone. He's amazing.
And we love him.
Yes.
Yeah.
As we love
yogurt.
most depressed stepdads.
Yes, bless him.
Anyway, one of your players from your first round of doing this gave you feedback about a DMPC that you'd made.
Yes, just I found myself like, we come up on a group of goblins that are trying to attack us or whatever. They're trying to jump us on the trail. And I'm like, okay, let me roll for this goblin. Okay, do that. Okay, now it's your turn. Okay, now it's back to my turn for this other goblin. Okay, now it's your turn. Oh, now it's my turn for... What was his name? It's a really cool name.
I don't remember.
Finn and Howley.
There it is. I was like, it starts with an F.
But then having to switch back over to his character sheet and be like, shit, what would he do here? I mean, I tried to make him simple, like crossbow guy, but he could also do a little healing. Because part of my thinking was, this group isn't very healy.
Sure.
So I want them...
I was the healer. You stole my thunder.
Shit, you're right. I can't remember. This was the pandemic, y'all.
But what you're describing actually, so like I think it speaks to the inherent trouble of a DMPC,
Mhm.
which I think is also the inherent trouble of being a psychotherapist, actually. This idea of like, what is it? It's egalitarian asymmetry, right?
Yeah.
Is the concept,
Yep.
which is a paradox and
Yeah.
in some ways
Mhm.
impossible,
Yeah.
right? The DMPC is a trope because the dungeon master knows the surprises that are coming up.
Mhm.
And so does this one character, and knows things that even the best DM who's trying to like not play that can easily fall into it.
Mhm.
In the same way that a psychotherapist engaging in this vulnerable, relationally oriented modality can sometimes forget how much power they hold in the relationship. And that can
Ooh.
cause so much trouble.
Can we talk about enactments now?
Yeah, okay.
Because that, I feel like that's a perfect just segue into how, I mean, enactment in therapy can be experienced in therapeutic D&D as well, because especially when the DM.
Wait, can you define the term?
Oh, God.
I have
You're
a
asking-
short version of it.
Go for
Go
it.
for it.
Cool. So, listener, enactment, among other helpful terms, will be defined in the first episode of the show.
Oh,
You can go back and
great.
listen to that. But in case you're not, an enactment within relational psychoanalysis is the idea that sometimes the unconscious of the patient intersects with some of the unconscious of the therapist to lead to a relational pattern that plays out between the two, where both are participating, usually largely informed by the patient or client's story, but where the therapist is not a like blank and neutral participant. They are actively involved. Something about the therapist's own needs or history or trauma are playing out in the midst of the enactment. So it's a category for enactments often cause ruptures, not always, but they usually have something of conflict in them or friction between people. And they usually happen while people don't really notice them building until they lead to a point of drama. So, and then when you have groups, then that category still is present, but is more complicated because you're dealing with so many
Yes.
different unconscious currents at once.
Yeah. And so what made me think of that is, so Kevin is like, he has his reasons for bringing in an NPC of his own. He wants more characters who can help more. I mean, he did almost kill us once. There was almost a total party kill. So,
Not
reasonable.
Finnan, the DM almost.
Yes.
Finnan went dark.
Correct. So, it was justified. We needed more people. And especially with getting the feedback that we still haven't heard about because we keep interrupting you.
No.
It can be so important to explore, like, okay, what else could be behind my reason for bringing in more of me than may have been needed? Like,
Gosh.
is it just something that's going on with me? Is there something that I was receiving from one of the player characters that told me like they need more? And it just adds to the play, like exploring what's really going on here. As Roy likes to say, what the hell is going on here?
Let me think about that for a second. So what the hell was going on with Finnan? First of all, just again, great name. Finnan Howley
great name.
as a ranger. Let's fucking go. So I think that's part of it was like one of my strongest coping skills during the pandemic was creating D&D characters on D&D Beyond because I had unlimited membership where I could just, I've got an idea for a guy. Oh, I've never played a female character. Oh, they have fairies now? Oh,
It still happens, you guys.
Centaur? And part of it was some insecurity about, I was still fairly new at DMing, and I wanted, like, the adventure I was running was a pre-written adventure that the recommended number of players was 4.
Oh, that's right.
And so I wasn't confident in my skills to like adjust encounters like, there's supposed to be, with 4 players, there's going to be 8 goblins.
Right.
But if there's only 3 players, do I do like a direct mathematical algebra, reduction, or is it different? So I was nervous. So I was like, I got to have a 4th character. And then I was getting really into practicing different voices and being silly. So both wanted to show off this cool character that was a good crossbow expert who could also heal. But I also was trying to help like the flavor of the group, make sure it was well-rounded. Because both the other characters in our first group chose wild magic sorcerers.
Oh God, that's right.
Wow.
Which,
it was fantastic.
Listener, wild magic sorcerers are like the most chaotic type of player you can play.
Yeah.
And they were both interested
beautiful.
in our lives are so kind of regimented.
Right.
And we wish we had a little more of like our chaotic self.
Yeah. To let the listener in a little bit more, when you say that, that's not like a stereotype. Like in very mechanics of the class, sorcerer is a particular kind of magic user who in the world of D&D, their magic comes from just who they are as a person. And a wild magic sorcerer is like supposed to be this character who just this wild, chaotic, magical energy has just touched them. And whenever they use their spells, which is what you do as a sorcerer, you cast spells, there's a chance that something bonkers might happen. And when we say a chance, we mean you literally roll dice on a table that says, yep, something bonkers is going to happen, and this is what the bonkers thing is.
Yeah, and it's a D100 table, which means there's 100 different things that might happen when you cast this spell.
D something means a dice of so many sides.
Some of them are good, some of them are neutral, some of them are terrible.
Like you might have all your hair fall out.
Right.
Your skin might turn blue, or you might cast that spell you were intending to cast and heal the person nearest you for 20 hit points.
Whether they're friend or foe.
Right.
Right.
Or one of the worst ones, you might cast Fireball centered on yourself.
Oh, God.
Which is a very powerful spell.
It's basically the D&D version of a grenade.
It is not good.
So hopefully, listener, I'm aware that we're a bunch of therapists talking about like the therapist's role. We're talking about this TMPC and what it meant for you. But also, hopefully, you're also hearing how you can read into the player's choices as like sources of possible meaning, right? Like if someone picks a lawful, good aligned, we won't talk about alignment today. You can look at that elsewhere. Yeah. So many articles about that. Like paladin, a sacred warrior, and they choose a god of justice. Like, why might they be doing that? What might they be working through? What does it mean that these two people both chose chaos as their source of magic and of their source of power? They had regimented lives. What does it mean that you made this guy who showed up and you got some feedback that said, hey, don't do that?
Yeah, is that what the feedback was?
He was gracious to say, because I started to notice how clunky it was and I kept apologizing. I'm like, sorry guys, I didn't think about how much time, geez. And he just frankly gave the feedback of like, it seemed like that seemed to be a little stressful and make things clunky for you. It might be smoother if you don't have a player character. I was like, thanks for saying that so just clearly. And I was very well received, and I did not in the second group. And it was noticeably easier to move through encounters without having the clunky, oh God, what do I do now with this guy? I forget.
Right.
Whenever I'm starting a group, some point before that session, I will have an individual 2.5 hour session with each player to create a character. Those are usually on Zoom so we can share screens. Although I think I did one in person, but then I was like, also pull up your Zoom so I could share my screen. And we go through a D&D Beyond character creation. And in that session and or in one of the first couple of group sessions, some of my favorite questions to ask folks are, do you think you created a character that's a lot like you or that's like opposite of you, or maybe exploring some shadow side of you that you don't get to express very much, or something else? I've also done like little mini character creation and a little mini adventure with some individual clients in actual therapy.
Yeah.
In a way that would be insurance approved.
Great.
You get that interactive complexity bonus too, which is nice.
Okay, that's good.
And those two, and then one of these group number 2 clients all created rogues I feel like it's really common. It's like I'll be describing like, so yeah, you can be a barbarian that has rage and smashes like Hulk, or you can be a wizard who studies spells and is really good with the arcane, or blah 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 blah. Or you could be a sneaky stabby person. They're like, ooh, tell me more about that one. And it's like almost like this caricature, like, oh yeah, you want to explore your shadow side, got it. And so fun. But like I was describing Dano, my impeccable Aussie accent, and I wanted to get back to a little bit more chaotic, whimsical, but really friendly part of me that I felt like had dissipated a little bit. So there's complexity of like, that has been a prominent part of me, and I felt like it slipped away and I want to bring it back. Versus my very first character was like a monk who they do like martial arts, kind of like Kung Fu Panda-esque, you could say, who had been a part of a religious monastery and then left it because he was questioning what he thought about spiritual things. And
now I know a little bit of your story. Yeah. I didn't know you wanted to share it with the listener, though.
Yeah, here we are. One of my emphases on my various Psychology Today profile and what have you is spiritual trauma for a reason.
Yeah.
Moving away from some of the more heavily religious parts of my actually lovely upbringing, by and large, and some of the religious places that were not so great in my young adulthood. Ended up, just like Chris and Applebee's. I was like, oh, I resonate. I know where you're going.
Yeah, I did the same thing. Yeah. Literally with a monk, actually.
Nice. Really?
Yeah.
My first was a druid. So like Tiefling druid. So like very
half
unusual. Devil. Half devil person. Lost my parents. Of course, you always have a tragic.
Oh, absolutely.
So many orphans in D&D.
That's everybody. That's default.
Yeah. So orphan, very obviously other, but still has this like playful, animalistic part of her. Yeah.
Yeah. For the listener, we use this word shadow, which is a concept from Jungian psychology, which like there's some controversy about whether or not that counts as psychoanalysis. I think it does. So, but don't send me those emails. But within Jungian,
so that would be Tyson.
No. Within Jungian psychology, there's this big emphasis on archetypes and personas and different ways of presenting oneself in the world. And the shadow self are the parts of the self that are largely disavowed. And a lot of Jungian's work on the idea of acknowledging your shadow self and figuring out how to make peace with it, and how to try to integrate it into a whole sense of self. Kind of thinking about like, imagine like Peter Pan, his shadow. Peter Pan's shadow kind of gets up to all sorts of nonsense. That's kind of a Jungian metaphor that like when you don't have peace and connection with your shadow self, it can kind of run wild. So it sounds like this is a space where lots of people are invited to like play in the world of imagination, including the parts of yourself that maybe are in some way or other disavowed, or to use IFS language, exiled, or to use traditional psychoanalytic language, repressed, whatever.
Yeah. It's all the same.
It's all the same.
Let's see. Oh, of course, I can't remember because it's ADHD that I wanted to talk about. ADHD, for the listener, can cause impairment in your working memory, which I've graciously displayed for you multiple times on this podcast.
I've largely edited out.
This is very educational.
But D&D, or tabletop role-playing games, draws a lot of neurodivergent folks.
Right.
ADHD, autism, as well as a lot of the queer community. I suspect, at least in part, because those folks of all those groups do a lot of masking. In their day-to-day life.
Can you define masking for the listener?
Presenting in a way you think socially you need to fit in, survive social situations, not do one more thing to disappoint someone or cause yourself to be ostracized, etc. And so there's just so much splitting off, like maybe someone with autism who has some more of the features of like avoiding eye contact. So they're having to like consciously tell themselves, I have to look these people in the eye, maybe, or they don't have to, but they are feeling obligated to because of social norms. That would be an example of masking socially. Just extrapolate that out to all the ways any human considers typically like socially, I got to make sure I'm good in this way or that way. And being able to just break free and be yourself, or be that part of yourself you don't get to be often, it's just a huge invitation. So I think it draws myself and many like me.
Yeah. Before we were recording, I was listening to I'll link it in the show notes, a conspirituality podcast where they interviewed a philosopher of games who said that in his definition of games, it's an art form whose primary like agent of art is agency, is choice. That's what makes a game a game. You make a choice and you get to like make art with those choices. And I can absolutely see why people who have to mask and also have less agency in society because they're of a marginalized group might be drawn to a game of persona and a game of embracing the shadow, including one's own sexuality and aggression.
I was enjoying considering like, so Roy Barsness has the book Core Competencies of
Relational Psychoanalysis.
Thank you. I definitely know the title. Don't worry about it. One of the core competencies around like therapeutic intent. I believe it was Jeremy Dew who posted in
no, that was Jeremy Morris.
Yes. Oh, my brain just blended them together because I don't think I learned people's last names.
He's in my group, which is why.
Well, that makes even more sense. He's so cool. So he had these therapeutic outcomes that I think are super helpful that for sure have a lot of application to these groups. So this was in the context of just relational psychodynamic therapy in general with individual clients, but applies here. Number 1, increase capacity to experience and manage multiple affective states and enjoy the full range of emotion. So that's affective. We're encouraging people to be more verbose or be like lean into stuff. Part of the perspective taking and empathy growth is you have to settle into who is this character that I'm playing? And I might not be too upset about this XYZ thing, but Dano sure would be really into that or really upset about that or whatever.
And just to add one thing, your character's allowed to change over time.
Right.
Yes.
Just as you are.
Well, so for the Scottish listeners, I have a character named Dougal Ingstung McBrailfight. He was raised in a secret cave because his mom was a plant person, dad was a dwarf. You know, they weren't supposed to mix. And he was raised into adulthood in this secret hewn out part of a cave, didn't know a lot of social norms. But he knows he wants to be a brave warrior like his dwarf dad. And so now in this group with our friends Pete and Stephanie, he's been kind of brazen and went in and like straight almost died a couple times. And I could keep playing him that way, but our kind of session directly after this most recent time he almost died, I was like, okay, I think it is fitting that he would have some character development here. And Pete's character like healed him right before he died. And so he went up and like thanked Pete's character for that, and which is Gardenarnar. He's a goblin bard that has an electric guitar. Thanked him and said, right, so I guess I'm learning to maybe not rush right into things, and I do say thank you. Again, apologies. All of the country-specific apologies, those will remain in the podcast.
Yeah. Keeping those in.
Wow. So that was the first one. Golly. All right.
Well, this actually makes me think about, I'll probably cut this out entirely, but an experience that I had when I was playing my religious trauma monk right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Part of his story was that there was a prophecy, there was a promise that failed utterly, and he was the last survivor. He just was trying to put his pieces together, and for a certain period, he debated whether or not he was dead, whether or not what he was experiencing was actually the afterlife, and he'd gone to hell or purgatory.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
Then in the game, he went down. In D&D, you have health points, and you can go down to 0. And after that, you might die, but more likely than not, someone will heal you and you'll come back up. So at one point, he went down, and after he came back up, he was faced with the fact that, oh no, I can't be dead because I tasted the edge of death. And it's nothing like what I'm doing. What I'm doing is actually living. So the prophecy failed, and I'm still alive, and I'm definitely not dead. So what am I going to do?
Wow.
And like that character arc was very much a reflection of where I was at, right? I had come from a background of all sorts of prophetic promise that seemed to have turned to dust. And I wondered, does life continue after this? And if so, what the hell does that look like? Is this some long extended divine joke? And through some of my life experience, I tasted a little bit of despair. I tasted a little bit of loss. And that helped me to realize, like, oh no, this is just living. And now I get to live. And that playing that out with that character in this silly game where like he went down because, you know, a dragon person got mind controlled to attack him. Like such goofiness, but also such like depth of emotional truth. Such a powerful art form. Okay.
Definitely don't take that out.
Okay. All right, I'll leave it in.
Irvin Yalom, who was getting quoted multiple times today, said something to the effect of, the reality of death destroys us, but the idea of death can save us. And in the context where he initially kind of came up with that was working with cancer patients.
Right.
Who were like, why did it take me until I had a terminal illness to start living the life that I wanted?
Yeah.
And the story you're sharing just struck me as like how profound it can be when we come to.
Right.
And you got to play with that even more with that character, which is really special.
Yeah.
Yeah. And for a player to have their character fully die.
Yeah.
That brings up all sorts of feelings and death anxiety. And like, yes, it's just a game, but it's not just a game.
Right.
And so the opportunities of exploration are endless.
Yeah.
And our brains don't actually know the difference. Parts of our brain don't know the difference between our character and ourself in terms of like when you start really role playing and then your character dies, like I don't know someone who doesn't get deeply emotional, probably cries in a scenario like that. Critical Role, Dimension 20, like when something like that happens and if they even like leave the table and like everyone else is just so somber because it's really truly felt. A real loss happened, which just speaks to how potent this medium is.
Yeah, how potent of an encounter.
One could say.
In one's marketing materials, perhaps.
Thanks.
Writes it down.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. I'm guessing we don't have time to go through the rest. So you guys just read Roy's book. Or...
Yeah. I mean, the final questions that I ask everybody, if someone's listened to this episode and they're interested and they want more, where would you direct them? What further learning would you point them towards?
So I mentioned I did a Therapeutic Game Master certification with Geek Therapeutics. You can just go to geektherapeutics.com and they have a whole catalog of continuing education units on there. And they pull from a broad breadth of geek artifacts.
Great.
So all genres of Star Wars or video games or comics, as well as for sure D&D and tabletop role-playing games. Excuse me. And then we're a part of Contemporary Psychodynamic Institute's Relational Psychodynamic Therapy certification program. Highly recommend.
Yes.
And then I do highly recommend watching Critical Role.
Mm-hmm.
I usually point people to starting with Campaign 2. You can find it on YouTube. They're also on Twitch.
It's a big commitment. So if you feel
Yeah,
like
a lot
it's
of
too much
hours.
for you, Dimension 20 is also a really good option. They're sillier, but still like very
Both
good
are
with
silly,
the role
but
playing.
Dimension 20 is literally a bunch of improv
Yeah, it's
people
Yes.
playing.
fantastic. And the seasons are significantly shorter.
Yes.
Yeah. For Dimension 20, I recommend Fantasy High. Started there.
Mm-hmm.
Because all the players were new to D&D. And so you get a good vibe for, you don't have to know all the friggin' rules.
Yeah, you can learn with them.
Even the
bit.
DM doesn't know all the rules. Don't worry about it.
Mm-hmm.
And do you happen to have my form notes?
I
'Cause
do.
I wrote stuff down, but I don't.
Yes. Yeah, we'll have linked in the show notes to, you mentioned taking an improv class. If you're a
Yes.
Seattle area, we've got a link
Jet
to that.
City Improv.
Yep. And the book that you referenced, Dr. Anthony Bean's book, Integrating Greek Culture into Psychotherapeutic Practice. And also you recommended another book, Return of the Lazy Dungeon Master.
That's just a great Dungeon Master reference of
Great.
like essentially how to channel your improv skills to not feel like you have to deeply plan every freaking session and then the
Right,
group
gotcha.
takes it a different direction anyway.
Right.
And has some really helpful tips in there. But also, apparently, I was going to quote drop a bunch of Stuart Brown's book on play. So that's out there. Highly recommend.
Yeah, I mean, I know it can be hard to find a group, but also one of the best things is just to play D&D.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah.
100%.
Just get in the game.
Mm-hmm.
So to do that, I highly recommend you can go on roll20.net
Right.
and search for upcoming games. Probably the easiest thing to search for would be D&D 5e, which means 5th edition. And you do not want us to talk about all the nuances of that. But that's the most played D&D version.
Yeah.
I referenced dndbeyond.com is a great place to make character sheets. Again, spiciness there. We're not going to go into it. I really enjoy using the platform. You can find various Discord groups. I really enjoy the YouTuber DND, like the letter N, D&D Shorts. Hilarious British guy, does a lot of short videos, which is why it's called D&D Shorts. And he has a Discord where I found online group that I'm in. And it's Thursday mornings at 7:30 a.m. to 11 a.m. because I'm the only West Coaster. But there's literally someone in Texas, someone in Arizona, someone in France and someone in Canada.
That's great.
And then going to any local game store, like board game store. If you're in the Seattle area, like Mox Cafe in Ballard or Meeples in West Seattle or a bunch of others, they have regular game nights, and many of them are like beginners welcome. So
Great. Yeah.
I guess we should plug ourselves as well. So if you're interested in learning more about Encounter D&D, you can go to our website at encounterpsychotherapy.com.
/DND.
Yes, that is
Or just, the .com part.
Then navigate your way there.
And again, listener, there will be links to all of these things in the show notes. Thank you both so much.
Thank you.
We very clearly could continue this conversation for hours and hours in dozens of directions, but I really appreciate the two of you coming on and sharing this lovely thing that you do and have made together. And also for being patient with me as I figured out how to interview two people at once, because
you did great.
I'm still learning too. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That was a blast.
You guys did great too.
Aw, thanks.
We all did great.
Go team.
Circle of love,
Yeah, great.
It's great.
All right. Bye.
Adios.
Very special thanks to Katherine and Kevin Klevjer. As of this episode's release in late February of 2025, Kevin is looking for new players for the upcoming Spring 2025 Therapeutic D&D cohort. He's also developing a therapeutic gaming facilitator training program. If you're interested in participating in the next Encounter D&D therapeutic gaming experience, or if you're interested in training to become a therapeutic gaming facilitator, you can send Kevin an email. His email address is kevin@encounterpsychotherapy.com. Link in the show notes. Katherine offers supervision to early career therapists seeking licensure and provides consultation around relational psychodynamic therapy to therapists at any stage in their career, both as it relates to therapeutic tabletop RPGs and in talk therapy. Katherine can be reached at katherine@encounterpsychotherapy.com. Link, again, in the show notes. Both Kevin and Katherine offer consultation groups in the MAMAL model, a consultation method developed at the Contemporary Psychodynamic Institute for their Relational Psychodynamic Therapy certificate program. If you're interested in participating in one of these groups, contact either of them. You know where the links are. Stick around after the credits for the most outtakes I've ever included at the end of one of these episodes. I hope you'll join us again in 2 weeks for our final regular episode of the season. I'll be talking with Matthias Massaro about ADHD medications and how they work. This has been The Way In. This show is hosted and produced by me, Tyson Connor, with music by Ben Lewis and visual art by Dan Lane. If you enjoyed this show, please rate, review, subscribe, follow, like, share, star, heart, reblog, retweet, repost, upvote, or in some meaningful way engage with the episode on your digital platform of choice. I'm told it makes a big difference for exposing more people to the show. And if you think someone you know may like this episode, you could also just tell them about it. You can follow the show on social media, where we are at The Way In Pod. There, you can give me feedback, tell me a joke, and see high-resolution versions of the individual episode art, which I highly recommend. I think Dan did a great job. Thank you for joining us. Until next time.
Leveled
It'll
up is the right
come
word.
out, and I'll probably make myself look like I've got me boom out the window.
Oh,
And
that's something we say regularly in our house now.
And,
Okay, yeah.
deepest apologies to all the Scottish listeners we have out there.
I'll let you know when I get emails.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so we'll hold that in mind, everyone. Thank you, listener. Thank you.
Don't be patronizing. Edit point.
No, on edit point. That's fine. You're reading patronizing into it. It's not there. We're married, everyone.
Transference, listener. Transference.
Okay. Golly. Maybe you do need to edit this.
I'll let my own creative vision help.
Yeah.
Drive the process.
Okay.
We trust you.
Swipe. Usually swipe left to find the show notes if you're listening on a phone.
You gonna swipe left on me, bro?
To find the links to, yeah. I gotta find the links.
You gotta make it a swipe right thing somehow.
I don't program the
You better get on
podcast apps. You're right. It's the wrong direction. You're absolutely right.